I always knew that being a mother meant sacrifice. I just never thought I would sacrifice everything. For 30 years, my life revolved around my son, Ethan. I worked multiple jobs, skipped meals to make sure he ate, and never spent a single dollar on myself if he needed something. When my marriage crumbled, I didn't mourn. I had no time. My son needed me, and that was all that mattered. But standing outside his house in the pouring rain, gripping my worn-out suitcase, I finally understood something I had refused to see for years. I had given him my life, and now, when I had nowhere else to go, he didn't even have space for me. The door opened slightly, and Ethan's wife, Susan, peered out. Her expression was cold, annoyed, as if I were some stranger who had interrupted her evening. "You can't stay here, Margaret," she said, not even bothering to step aside. "It's just not a good time." A lump formed in my throat. I lost my job. I just need a little time to get back on my feet. Just a few weeks. Ethan appeared behind her, his face hard. "Mom, I told you before. You're an adult. I can't take care of you." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for any sign of hesitation. There was none. The cold rain seeped into my clothes, but the chill I felt had nothing to do with the weather. I had spent my whole life making sure he never felt abandoned, and yet here I was, abandoned by the very person I gave everything to. The rain felt heavier as I stood there, waiting for Ethan to change his mind. But he didn't. He only sighed, rubbing his forehead like I was a burden he couldn't wait to get rid of. "I'll send you some money," he said finally, as if that could fix everything. I swallowed back the lump in my throat. "I don't need your money, Ethan. I need my son." His jaw tightened. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it already is." Susan shifted impatiently. "It's late, Margaret. You should go." I looked past them into the warm, well-lit house, a house I had helped him buy when he and Susan were struggling, a house where I had babysat my grandson, cooked meals, and done laundry when they were too busy to handle it themselves. And now there was no space for me. I nodded, my fingers tightening around the handle of my suitcase. "I understand." I turned away before they could see my tears. I didn't know where to go. I walked aimlessly, my shoes soaking through as I stepped into puddles. The city had changed since I had last wandered its streets alone. It felt bigger, colder. By the time I reached a small diner, my hands were numb. The bright neon sign flickered, and through the fogged-up windows, I could see a few late-night customers sipping coffee. I stepped inside, the warmth hitting me like a forgotten memory. "Rough night?" the waitress asked as I sat at the counter. I forced a small smile. "Something like that." She poured me a cup of coffee before I even asked. "On the house," she said with a wink. "You look like you need it." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, my eyes stinging with exhaustion. "Thank you." I had spent my whole life taking care of others. Maybe it was time I let someone take care of me. The diner became my refuge. I spent the night there, sipping coffee slowly, watching the world move outside. By morning, the waitress, Lisa, handed me a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. "Eat," she said. "You look like you haven't had a decent meal in days." I hesitated, but my stomach betrayed me, growling loudly. I hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. "So what's your plan?" Lisa asked, leaning against the counter. I let out a dry laugh. "I come have one." She studied me for a moment before nodding. "Well, I do. I need help around here. Cleaning, taking orders. It's not much, but it's something." I blinked at her. "You're offering me a job." She shrugged. "You look like someone who knows how to work hard, and I know what it's like to have nowhere to go." Tears burned my eyes, but I pushed them back. "Thank you," I whispered. For the first time in a long time, someone saw me. The first few days at the diner were tough. My body ached from standing on my feet all day, and my hands were raw from scrubbing dishes, but I pushed through. Hard work had never scared me. Lisa was kind but firm. "You're too soft-spoken," she said, handing me a notepad. "Speak up when you take orders. People respect confidence." Confidence. I had lost that somewhere along the way. Still, I learned quickly. I memorized the menu, smiled at customers, and stayed late to help close up. I went from a woman with nowhere to go to someone who had a purpose again. But at night, when I lay on the old cot in the tiny room Lisa let me stay in, the loneliness crept in. I missed Daniel. I missed being a mother. I wondered if he missed me too. One evening, as I wiped down the counter, the diner door chimed. I looked up and froze. Ethan. He stood there awkwardly, hands shoved into his coat pockets. He looked out of place among the worn-down booths and smell of frying bacon. "What are you doing here?" My voice was steady, but my heart pounded. He sighed. "Mom, I've been trying to call you." I changed my number. He nodded as if he expected that. "Look, He hesitated, glancing around. "Can we talk?" Lisa, watching from the kitchen, raised an eyebrow at me. I gave her a small nod. I led Ethan to a booth in the back and sat across from him, arms crossed. "What do you want?" He exhaled heavily. "Daniel keeps asking about you." My breath hitched. "He does." Ethan rubbed his face. "Yeah, he doesn't understand why you left." Anger flared in my chest. "I didn't leave, Ethan. You threw me out." His jaw tightened. "Mom, it wasn't like that." I laughed bitterly. "Wasn't it? You let Susan talk you into turning your back on me, after everything I did for you." He flinched, and for the first time I saw guilt in his eyes. "I was wrong," he admitted quietly. "I shouldn't have listened to her." A small part of me wanted to soften, to tell him it was okay, but it wasn't okay. I took a deep breath. "What do you want from me, Ethan?" He hesitated. "I want Daniel to see you." The words hung between us. I should have been happy. I had dreamed of this moment, but something inside me had changed. "I'll think about it," I said finally. Ethan nodded, as if he understood that he no longer had control over this decision. This time it was up to me. The next day, Lisa handed me my paycheck, my first one in years. It wasn't much, but it was mine. "You should do something for yourself," she said. So I did. I walked into a second-hand clothing store and bought myself a dress, something simple but nice, a reminder that I was still a woman, not just someone's mother or someone's burden. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, studying myself. For years, I had let life happen to me. I had been a mother, a caregiver, a housekeeper, everything but myself. Ethan wanted me to see Daniel, but for the first time, I realized I couldn't go back to being the person I was before. I needed to figure out who I was now. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's words. "Daniel keeps asking about you." Every night, I imagined my grandson's small face, his confused eyes, wondering why I had disappeared. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. But then I remembered the way Ethan and Susan had treated me, the way they had discarded me without hesitation. I wasn't the same woman they had thrown out of their house. One evening, as I cleaned up after the last customers had left, Lisa sat across from me at the counter. "You've been distracted," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Thinking about your son." I nodded. "He wants me to see my grandson." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "And do you want to?" I hesitated. "Yes, but not like this, not as the woman they tossed aside." Lisa leaned back, studying me. "Then don't. Go back on your own terms." Her words stayed with me all night. The next morning, I made a decision. I would see Daniel, but I wouldn't come crawling back like a desperate woman begging for scraps of love. I took a bus to the real estate office downtown, the one handling the sale of high-end properties, the same place I had once been humiliated. But this time, I walked in with my head held high. A polished young man greeted me. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Are you here to inquire about a property?" "Yes," I said, pulling out my bank statements. "I'd like to purchase two." His eyes widened. "Oh, of course. Let me get our senior agent." "No need," I interrupted, nodding toward the young assistant in the corner. "I want her." The girl's eyes lit up in surprise, and for the first time in a long time, I felt powerful. By the end of the day, I had bought 2 luxury apartments, one for myself and one as an investment. I wasn't just a mother or a former housekeeper anymore. I was a woman who controlled her own future, and that was the woman who would face Ethan. I called Ethan. "I'll see Daniel," I told him, "but at my place." He hesitated. "At your place?" "Yes." I gave him the address to my new home, knowing he would recognize the expensive neighborhood. "Take it or leave it." A long silence followed. Then, finally, he said, "All right, we'll be there." The day they arrived, Susan's face twisted in shock as she looked around my beautiful apartment. "How? How did you afford this?" I smiled. "Hard work. The same thing you told me to keep doing." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, I raised a hand. "Don't. I didn't ask you here for apologies." Daniel ran up to me, his little arms wrapping around my waist. "Grandma." Tears pricked my eyes as I hugged him tightly. This was what mattered. Not Susan, not Ethan, just this little boy who still loved me. After a while, Susan, clearly uncomfortable, cleared her throat. "We should go." I knelt beside Daniel and smiled. "Come visit me anytime, sweetheart. My home is always open to you." Ethan met my eyes, understanding the message hidden in those words. For Daniel, yes. For you, that depends. As they left, I felt no pain, no anger, just peace. I had lost a son, but I had gained something more, self-respect. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Years passed. Ethan rarely called, and I didn't mind. I traveled, painted, and built the life I had always wanted, but never allowed myself to have. One day, while drinking coffee on my balcony, I received a message. It was from Ethan, a single sentence. "I understand now." I smiled, sipping my coffee. It was too late for us to go back, but I had already moved forward, and that was all that mattered.